let me just start. And feel free to ask questions along the way. I want to, as long as I say dog food this, I want to actually experience this meeting and this collective in a way that it's basically what I talked about in the sketching book. The only way to engineer the future tomorrow is to have lived in it yesterday. And the way to do that is to basically improvise and use duct tape, bubble gum, whatever you need to get a high fidelity of the experience so you can gain the insights that say when you start to build prototypes and go further down, you know that why you're doing it and that it's worth the investment. And so you can refine things. And you're going to see also the long nose where a lot of these things go back a long way. And of course, none of it was all, I've been involved in it for a long time, but I'm sure not the only one who contributed to what I'm going to talk about tonight. And the first thing I want to say, which is the overarching framing, is that essentially there's three kind of approaches or conceptual models for how we deal with technologies, digital technologies today. And one, it's the longest standing one in many ways is ubiquitous computing. And this is coming from Mark Weiser's article, The Computer for the 21st Century. And it's basically saying, computers are going to be everywhere. And you can have access all the time and so on and so forth, then I'll have something to say about that. I worked with Mark closely. I did the conceptual design for one of the three digital devices that were part of that, the Park Tab, the Park Pad, and the Live Board, these three form factors and so on. The second one would be immersive technologies and basically where we work together and so on, and whether that be with VR, AR, and that's the key part, but I'd also include media spaces and things like Teams and so on in that category and explain that during the talk. And the third one is artificial intelligence, or let's say intelligent systems. And what I'll say about that coming forward is AI and machine learning are clearly important. They're clearly doing things that those of us that have been in the industry for 45 years never we dreamed about, but it's remarkable. But having said that, it's still in its infancy, and at best, I'd say it certainly has huge value in certain areas, but like my largest repeated axiom is everything's best for something or worse for something else. But more importantly, if you take the intelligent systems, immersive systems, and ubiquitous systems as separate silos, all of them will suffer and none of them will reach their potential. There's a mutual dependence. And so what I'm trying to say is, and I'll try to explain why I think that's true, and from that level of approach, we can start to say, let's talk about intelligent systems, intelligence environments, where things just work together seamlessly, transparently, and they enhance our ability to perform what we want to do, and furthermore, impose a bias that actually make things be perhaps based on principles of what we believe, our belief systems about how society should function and so on, which is not necessarily the case today. So with that, I'll just move on and we'll start off right away. This is some work that was done in around 1992. We published it with Abigail Salem as part of the telepresence project. It builds heavily on the work that I'd been involved with at Xerox's Palo Alto Research Center with the media space that is pioneering. It goes back even to an art project called A Hole in Space. You can look that up if you want. But it leverages work and insights from the group at Belcore, which was doing with Bob Kraut and the team there, and they're the early pioneers. And so what we did is we basically built this system where we had these three little units that you could sit in the desktop, And when you're going to have a meeting with, say, 3 other people, so a 4-way round the table conversation, the diagram here sort of shows that, so that that each person is represented at a separate physical place where you see them, where you hear them from, and where there's a consistent geometry, so you maintain the geometry here. Now, based on that geometry says, this is the user interface, that if you get an invite, the seats are empty, and when you're coming to join the meeting, you don't say, can I join the meeting? No, I'm gonna take this chair. Because if the systems and interfaces were appropriately designed, they know how many people have been invited, so they know what the floor plan should be. So why can't you select your seat the same way you do on an airplane or at a concert? And then it enforces the symmetry of the geometry, so that right now, I'm looking at the screen for the audience for you, but there's individuals here that I'm looking at as well, and everybody has that sense of gaze awareness. And that's a fundamental thing, because when somebody's speaking and somebody's looking at somebody else while they're doing that, that has certain means, and depending on the facial expression and so on. But a lot of our social interactions are based on that. So anyhow, this was the start. Now, later on, when I went to Microsoft, I just brought this thing up with me and put it down. And where is it? I guess I misplaced it. Anyhow, we built some units that duplicate that, because this was all done with this. These were just a foam core. I had a surveillance camera from Radio Shack inside of it. We tore apart these little TVs. You could get 2-inch TVs for $100, and we put them inside. And then we had analog video going to a switch and moving things around. It was absolutely spaghetti analog engineering, but it worked. But it was camouflage, and we did studies. And this configuration is going. So we build on top of that. So if we go to this, the fundamental thing that's taking place in there is basically the use of space and place, and not just an absolute context, but in relative. So you have this gaze awareness, and furthermore, with the audio and not just visual, so that if you speak to me while I'm looking over here, your voice draws me to, even if you're out of sight, even if it's coming from behind. So right now, whether it's on the desk or within the room or within a building, these are concepts of space that architects have dealt with for years. And one of my favorite architects is somebody, Louis Kahn. If you ever go to the University of California at San Diego to visit Don Norman's group and Jim Holland's group, so on, the Salk Institute is just, you can walk there from that lab, go there and see that building. Louis Kahn designed it. But he makes a statement: thoughts exchanged by one and another are not the same in one room as in another. But they're also not the same as we found out with the Hydra, from the previous slide with Abby in it, is they're not even the same on one desk in one position on a single desk in another. And so because of who's speaking, and place at every level of the hierarchy, from on the desk, within the room, within the building, and that's the physical context, but even in terms of social contexts, that the space really makes a difference. And so let's start with where we are right now. So you're in the sort of downstairs, my workspace at my home, which doubles as a library, a photo studio, place where I curate my collection, and just where I do my work. And this is a top-down view, which there's the screen where I'm at right now. Here, you're over here at the bottom end, and actually there's a couple people in here alive, sitting in chairs in this space. So we're having a hybrid meeting, remote, with a presenter. It's a certain class of, standard form meeting. And so let me give you a bit more detailed tour. So here's how I'm seeing you. I've got a Surface Studio mounted, hooked on these, U-line types of bracket things, a little shelf I put here in front of the books. And of course, that's a dummy image, so it's just a photograph, but I see you about that size and on that screen, and you're about 10 feet away from me. And the camera on top that's coming here just viewing me through means that you know when I'm looking at you. And you know when I'm not looking at you. And when Ilona was presenting, so her proxy's there by name, if she was the co-presenter or something, that's where she'd be. And in fact, this is set up like the Hydra. So this is a place where another co-presenter could be on this machine here. And so I can have a three-way conversation remotely without any of the work on this screen. And here's the example where Abby Sellen is over here from this snapshot, and my other colleague, Michelle Pau, is here. And so on that three-way conversation, we can be going like this, like that, spatialized audio that comes for free. And by the way, if you're there auditing that conversation, you can speak up and pull our attention back to there. But this is just, we can do that for jamming. And this whole surface here is there for the workspace. And one of the things I would suggest to you is that all of us probably were working with Teams or with Zoom or with any of the other similar types of software. How much work did you actually do during those sessions? Because if you can see the people, how do you see the work? And if you do see the work, it's sort of like this, where it's a presentation. So I'm presenting. It's not reciprocal. We're not creating the work together, like on a whiteboard. My measure there would be if we had intelligent systems, then a elementary school teacher should be able to teach arithmetic using the skills they've acquired for the last 10 years of teaching on a whiteboard. They should be able to do so remotely on an electronic whiteboard with the same skills with 10 minutes of instruction, period. That would be my design spec. It's in performance. But the fact is that having multiple people, especially remote, drawing or working on the same whiteboard or at the same time is really difficult. And if you look at the whiteboards, the shared whiteboards that are out there right now, they're a challenge, to say the least. And there are programs like Figma and so on that let you work together, but these are really, really rare. And they're typically, it's difficult to match in the task space with the person space and have the similar geometry. So now if I'm working with them, they're there, but in the conference room situation, it doesn't matter if I'm the speaker live, I'm up front. And if Ilona was speaking up from here, it would be up front. So we're going to touch base on that, but this is this thing. Now, in what I'm showing you right now, there is absolutely no new hardware. There's absolutely not a line of code. It is simply taking a bunch of old machines, none of which can run Windows 11. They're not that powerful. That's how old the machinery is. And it's just running Zoom. And sometimes I have multiple meetings going to each one. It's awkward, but it can work. And so we're using Zoom today, but if we're using Teams, you could actually have you two Teams meetings, and you could just, if you're going to speak, you could move from the audience up to here and have agency to do that on your own, and then move back to where you are. And you can't do that. And furthermore, if we had a whiteboard and stuff like that, or shared workspace, you could actually have it and also let it so that anybody in the audience who wants to ask a question, you could point and say, Bill, what's that? And if you can't do that remotely, but you can in a conference room, you're missing a major part of the transactions that are just typically there. And so this type of thing is as important to show us what we can't do, but what we should be able to do. And the closer we come back to trying to model the everyday skills, the more we'll recognize what's missing. And then that can help us direct to say, are these things which are missing important enough to invest in finding the people with the skills to be able to enable them? So what I want to say now is, and this is the part this to me, because this is all saying, well, man, this takes a lot of work, and how much time do we spend in conference rooms versus our desks and all these different form factors. It comes back to this notion about the three things: intelligent systems, ubiquitous media, and immersive technologies. Now, if you look at this, and this literally is a copy of my desk. In fact, that desk is in that room right there. I'm talking to you from that desk. That's how far away it is. So pretend this isn't configured as an office. Sorry, as a conference room, which so far, for the most part, that's what I've been doing. But pretend it's just my office, and this is the whiteboard in my office, which when we had offices, that's what you typically had. This isn't a big whiteboard. That if you came into my office, you're never going to touch my computer unless you're my kids or something like that. But if you want to, I want to be able to throw stuff up here so we can talk about it. And then we work on it together, two people on the screen at the same time. And it doesn't matter whether you come in remotely or you're there in person. So I want you to notice, this is my real setup. I have a Surface Pro here, which a kickstand lets me fold it down and up, so I can use it either as a separate monitor, or I can use it as a sketching surface, because it's a pen-based computer. I've got a Surface, that one I think is a Surface Go, and this is a Surface Pro. And they sit there, and the pattern here is really important. It's like Alexander's pattern, like architecture used in terms of a pattern language. And so let me step back for a moment. I'm not talking about the design of interaction techniques. I'm trying to talk about an interaction language, which is different than an interaction method. That if I have an interaction language, you understand the sentence structure, the basic structure of the conversation, and therefore, when you are confronted with something that follows the same pattern, even at a different level of hierarchy, you're going to transfer that knowledge of what you existing knowledge onto the new situation, and you will know what to do, because it's the same thing, just at a different scale. So if you're in a conference room with this configuration, and then you walk into my desk, same deal. You know exactly what these things are for. And yet they're for very, very different functions and different contexts and different usage patterns. And so, yes, if I want this to work, they have to be in different patterns, but these are just independent systems. These two are independent, and this computer is driving that. So this is the shared task space. If I want to be working on a drawing, that's work I can just have for reference if I'm looking up references in there. And that's where Panda is, and this is where Abby is. Now, both those people actually work in Cambridge, England. Now, what's really interesting about the desk in this case is, and this is just about how to use the tools that are already there, but very few people do this. And it doesn't matter if that was a phone or whether it's a laptop or an iPad or whatever. I keep a Teams meeting open 24/7, 365. That machine, on one of those machines, is just a chair with the camera up, the microphone muted, but the speaker on. So that anybody who wants to drop by my office can just jump in there and see if I'm there. And if I'm there, they can peek. And if I look free, they can, hey, got a minute, Bill. Exactly what you do if you walk by an open door in my office. But more importantly, if the light's on and you come in and I'm not there, you can just say, hey, Bill, are you around? Because I might be here, or I might be over in my photo booth shooting something, but I'll hear them as if they're in the space, and then I can shout back, and I can't shout back, but I can run and then turn the microphone on. And I have a foot pedal, here's how fast I can mute things. You want, I heard you, now I can talk to you. That's it. So that one can just be there. Now, here's what happens in terms of the social transactions of how you have presence and awareness in a context through simple use of space. Often, I'm in a meeting here, and I have scheduled back-to-back meetings. And so, and it doesn't matter if it's an individual or group. I'm in a meeting with one team, and then my next meeting comes on. When I start here, and what I would prefer to happen is when it's 5 minutes to the next meeting, I want this to come live without me doing a damn thing. And if that happens, here's what's happening. I'm still talking to Abigail. And then my meeting with Panda comes up. He's going to hear me speaking to her. And I'm going to be aware that he's there. And he'll recognize Abby's voice. And that takes away, it's the same thing that happens when you're in a conference room when people are piling out outside the window of the door. You don't have to tell anybody we have to get out of here because somebody else is coming. There's another meeting. It just happens because that peripheral change of context is happening. But the coolest thing is that when I'm there, he'll say, hey, Abby, or I've often said, hey, Panda, there's something I was talking to Abby about that you can help with. And so somehow we can leverage that peripheral awareness to actually engage in the types of conversations that you have in the transitions from moving out of one meeting and other people coming in the other meeting, and you say, and somebody's there that you wanted to talk to, and you say, hey, can we meet afterwards with that? Have those types of chance hallway bumping into conversations. And it happens organically, simply because you've got separate channels so they're not stepping on top of each other. But I can also, but on the other hand, I can take over this thing so that I can have three-way conversations and then do the work. Now, what's interesting about this is the information, when you have a system like Teams or Zoom or any of the other similar products, they take no advantage of the knowledge they have through the invitation as how many people are going to be in that meeting. And what we know from the study of meetings is that if you have that, the vast majority of meetings have 2 or 3 people in them, time spent in meetings, and they're very short, they're typically unscheduled. And read Bob Kraut's work about this. And you go back into the 1951, there's a really classic paper. And the thing here is that, and if there's more than 8 people, it's highly unlikely the meeting is going to involve group work on a single project where they're going to produce something in writing, because you can't do document sharing with more than about 8 people. And that's been true since before the computer era. You get up to 12 to 20, it's going to be an information or a seminar, and where people can move and present and so on and so forth. They can ask questions. If you get over about 18, there's going to be maybe people who are auditing, sitting on the second row around, and others sitting closer. Now, if that's the case, from the number of presenters, there's sort of set pieces as to what the geometries and the organizational structures and seating plans. Now, if you want, there's a couple really good books that, this one here. And I've got a bibliography that at the end of the deck, I'm going to put it up on the chat so you can get the bibliography with the links to these things. And this just has a whole thing about what's the social studies from all the social science around meetings, and it's for architects. And this one is from Summers. This book is this is by Summers, is the person who sort of first coined the term personal space and talking about personal space as opposed, and in contrast to that, to personal territory and so on. And these distinctions that help understand, not understand maybe perfectly, but help inform our understanding about how best to choose appropriate defaults based on these other parameters, like how many people are in the meeting, how big should it be, and how many seats should there be at the table so that people can do that. And if it's larger, maybe it's a presentation. And so the person setting up the meeting can help give some heuristics to that, so that the meeting, when you come into it, is configured in appropriate geometries and can help make sure that the spatial places are there. I can still say, I know you're thinking, yeah, but you've got all these computers and displays, and what's that going to happen to accessibility and cost and so on and so forth. We're going to get to that because I hope that's what you're thinking. But right now, I just want you, by the way, my desk isn't that clean. I cleaned up the clutter to take that photograph. In fact, I photoshopped a bunch of stuff out because it was just it's not normal. But I want to just highlight the important parts. But the key thing is I want to show that the patterns of the conference room fit the patterns of the whiteboard within the office, but they also fit the patterns on the desk. And it's all the same configuration, so you only have to learn one thing. And so now we can say they can also fit my phone. So this is one of these. It's just it's a little smartphone that's called the Duo that Microsoft made. But let's just say there's probably not a lot of them out there. But I'm just saying that with this, if I put it this way, camera, I can have two people there and a pen, and this is all pen-based, and I can have a three-way meeting with a shared whiteboard on this phone, and I could be communicating with somebody who's on a whiteboard and the other person on a desk like mine, and we all can work together, despite the fact the form factors that we're using are very, very different. But here's the important thing. This is going to come up again and again. The only way to get consistency with experience is to be inconsistent and allow inconsistency with the technologies mediating the experience of each individual person in a way that's appropriate to their local resources, the tools that they have, and they can still have agency, participation, and presence. And it's the same thing when you're in a phone call in your car compared to a phone call with not in your car. In your car, it's mouth on and ears on. And if your fingers on and eyes on, you should lose your driver's license. And yet when you move out of the car, out of the context, there's 100% change in interaction language. And there's about a 90% change in the hardware. And the person at the other end has no idea how you're doing this. And again, we'll come back to that. But I just want to show that these are all variations of the same pattern. And they can be supported on different form factors and a lot more. So now here's Abigail. And again, this is a mock-up. It's a Surface Go. There's my friend and colleague, Nick and Michelle. And she's talking to them. Even with a Surface Go, with a single camera, here's her confidence monitor. She can see what's going, what they're seeing, and you can still see if the images are there that Michelle and Nick know when she's looking at each other, if things are configured properly. And what I can tell you is that in a three-way conversation, even if you line things up that way, you cannot, in Teams, for example, have it symmetrical. So that one of these people, and in this case, for example, when Abby's looking at Michelle, there is a 1 in 2 chances that Nick's going to think she's looking at him. And when he's talking and nodding her head, Michelle's going to think she's nodding at Nick, because the geometries aren't maintained. And the reason is, first of all, the user interface doesn't let you choose the seat, like I showed in the original Hydra concept. But for the underlying engineering as such, that it does not allow that. And so from the user experience perspective, it's not just a UI or a design thing. Some of the issues to get these things right has to go right down to the plumbing of the systems. And that's why we can't work alone. Yes.
The focus is off in the camera.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. How to unlock? Go back here.
Yeah.
And then log. Speak up.
Panning again.
Yeah, that's better.
Oh, it's panning. I have, this is,
New intelligent camera.
yeah, tell me. Thanks. Okay. So here's what we can do about it. And this is the part that is really, really neat. And this is work from 2009. This is a Windows, probably, well, 2009. So it's Windows 8, maybe. Camera on top. And if you know, Colin, where's stuff, for example, about Fish Tank VR? Or this is a cave. Watch. I'm just standing in front and the camera is tracking me. My head movement and my body movement. And so what's going on here is there is a cubic volume, a virtual volume, pushed back behind the display that's pinned around the bezel at the front end and moves in the back. And as you move your head, the perspective of that box goes back and forth like so. So by gaze awareness, you can actually look. I'll show it again so you can watch this. But this is absolutely technically feasible on any computers and even on phones today. Have the computational power. Now, what you notice is there's Windows stuff just mapped onto that plane. So each plane of the back plane, the top plane, the bottom plane, and the two side planes, you just texture map 2D flat windows. And so here's the crazy thing. You can, just because it's flat and 2D, the actual window, it can be oriented differently in 3D space. And furthermore, it can be dynamic. And so if you are on a small display, and some of this can work the same way that George Fitzmaurice's chameleon system was, you can just move this around. And so when you want to look at, if I wanted to look here, I just move my head over here to take, and it will just shift over. So I get a better view of here and I compromise there. But it's dynamic adaptation to my viewpoint. And it doesn't affect your view. I can just wander and it gives me, and I don't have to have a headset. And the important thing about 3D is to understand that, in fact, parallax is a much better, a reliable cue in general than stereopsis. And it's often, especially, and that's really what we, in the world of VR, this is simply a single person cave. Now, we haven't got to the point where you can put other people and things in 3D on the top of here to be moving around. That you can do that. It hasn't been done. But these are the things that start to lead to solutions, because here's what happens. That once we've done this, you realize I can take what was there before, and on your really the cheapest computer that you can buy from Microsoft, this is computationally possible. There's Nick, there's Michelle, there's the whiteboard. Oh, what's the pattern? My goodness, look, it's that, and this whiteboard. The same geometry. And for three-way meetings with the work, and actually I can have notes and stuff like that in the agenda down here even, I can do that on a single laptop. It's possible to do. Nobody's doing it. And you can use the camera for the tracking. You can turn it on and off. You can tune it. But that means if we engineered the underlying plumbing appropriately, and I could stream multiple threads onto a single screen and do the 3D transformations and map them onto those surfaces, and yet that's what you're getting, for example. And for me here, I would have them mapped to do three different surfaces, display surfaces, and perhaps three completely different computers if I have the right local switching network to be able to redirect the data channels. And so this is really important in terms of accessibility, because in each case, whatever you have will let you be enfranchised, if we do the engineering correctly, to be able to join this meeting, but it's heterogeneous in terms of the technologies mediating at each local site. And the question is, what has to happen, is that when you make the connection, you basically have to have, these are the channels that we're sending in terms of the separate sources that you want to have. And then you negotiate, what technologies do you have available at your local site? You can tune that to say, here's my defaults, here's where I want things laid out. And then the thing gets configured appropriately. That's adaptation. And so it goes even further, that if you wanted, you can have a four-way meeting. This is closer now to the original Hydra thing that I showed you. And you can have the workspace down here. Now, even if I don't have a screen, I can have a tablet, or I could just use a pen on the touchpad to write this. But here's the other part, which is really important. And there's a paper called Three's Company that's in part of the bibliography I'll share, that says that for me, that whiteboard is going to be oriented with a baseline to me. But Abby, it's going to be rotated that way, so she's going to see it with a baseline to her. And this is pretty cool because we, when appropriate, we can all see the work the right way up for us. And we get consistency of ease of view and marking and drawing and writing by being inconsistent about what our orientation is. It's tailored to the remote person. And it's the integration of these things that just, I think that if you're working remotely in small groups, which is where most of the work is done, 3-4 people covers something like 80% or 90% of time spent in meetings. You can start to do these things that let everybody join in. Now, let's get down to VR. By the way, is there a point right now before I'm going to continue on, but I'm slightly different, go to the next step? Anything right now that we need to catch up or would be helpful? You're very quiet.
There's a question from Carl.
Yeah.
I wonder if it could be mocked up by using OBS to capture off-screen windows and synthesize a scene.
So the answer is yes. And I'm going to show you some of that right now. And there's some forthcoming work that's going to that's in press right now about how to do these things. But there is some initial work being done in this space, but it is absolutely at the sort of let's submit it to Chi type of or CSCW type of level, and not there needs to be a lot more work, and there needs to be a lot more people working in this area. And if we think about how much real estate is and where people are living and working remotely, if we can improve this, it's going to be it's really important economically, and the first movers are gonna get there. I mean, if they pay attention. So I'll come.
Question.
Yeah, one other question, sure.
Curious to know when you're setting up the space, if you think about standing or sitting regarding the displays on the tripods, allowing you to change heights and angles from the end.
Yeah, I love industrial design, and I love that kind of thing. So what I have here, without having to build too much, is I'll show you one of the things I do. I'm gonna take this. This is the Surface Pro. Okay, look how I do this. It's a piece of plywood. It's on sort of a Manfrotto stand. It's got a little lip here to hold it, and a lip here. This is an inner tube off of my 10-speed. It obviously had a flat tire, right? So I use the kickstand like that, and I just slide it down there. And I can rotate this by just like that, so I can have it change the aspect ratio to be landscape or just like screen rotation, and it still bends. But what I do when I started to play this, I just used one of these in place of the Surface Studio, and I just I don't know my books to fall down. But you know how these things you put in your bookshelf to hold the books, they slide out of the books and keep the books from coming over? I just use this. And I guess you can't see this, but if I just shove this
Under the books.
under the books, it'll hold it on a bookshelf and I can put it at whatever level on my bookshelf. And I can do that in the office if somebody comes in and I want to be able to do that. Now, that doesn't answer your question. It gives a simple solution for certain occasions and certain contexts where it can work, and they get you started.
Mhm.
The reason I love and that's I really liked some of the stuff that Microsoft is doing, and while I was there, that's why I work there. The Surface Studio is really interesting, as are these with the kickstand, because like I spoke about on my desktop, on my desk, this machine is usually like this, but when I'm using the upper auxiliary monitor for work, I can just tilt it like that, and bingo, without having to adjust cables, I can now write. The reason we don't use pen computing is because we only use it about 5% of the time, perhaps, but it's really important to sign documents and to be able to annotate and so on. And so what happens here is the Surface Studio has this beautiful hinge and come right down, and you have a nice drawing board. And if you have this, and if you can have the auxiliary things off on the side, then and they can just be phones. I have your phone on a little stand, and I have these little stands that I can put on the end of tripods and stuff like that. There's tons of things you can do if you do a little bit of shopping. So, but typically we don't design things for that type of flexibility. But what we can do is, even if some of these capabilities, like the kickstand designers, never were thinking about it being part of like a bookshelf. I just happen to have a lot of books and a lot of bookends, and it became obvious because of the context. It just suggested to me, it was just, oh yeah, this is really obvious. The trick is, my definition of creativity, what we bring to this is, my definition of the act of creativity is the act of making the obvious obvious before it's obvious. Well, that's the best kind of creativity, because when you explain it, say, well, that's obvious. That's not a big idea. Yeah, it is now that I've told you. But what's obvious to you is not obvious to me, and that's how we share our obvious comments. And we never be embarrassed to say, I know this might be obvious, but what about this idea? You could just slip this thing here. Or what about using an inner tube with plywood and this sort of stuff that jury rigged that? I'm doing carpentry and not computer science, but actually I'm doing UX research. But I'm being really conservative about where I spend my energy. So this is an ongoing thing, and we don't want to have this one size fits all. But the best way to do is, how can we adapt these things? And so if I want people to be able to move from a space to space, I get a PDF file, I draw the floor plan and on the PDF, and then I add at one place, when you click, you just click to make any meeting. You click the link between, and it will bring you to that Teams meeting. It'll have the invite URL there, and so you don't have to. You can embed that in the invitation. It's really cool. And my camera's still wandering, isn't it?
Can you describe what it takes currently for us to appear so photorealistic to each other?
Yeah, so I mean, for background, we both did these
Mark,
for
sorry, I was busy. So the sound came from there, and my camera's now messing around again too. So let me just stop. Get back to where you belong. These cameras that you use hand gestures, if a hand's got to my head, then it thinks I'm trying to track me, and there's no way to get it to go back. And what the thing about using hand gestures to control the camera for tracking and so on and so forth, and for modes, is that speakers are supposed to be gesturing to the audience, not to the camera. And there's a fundamental design flaw there. So I'll move ahead because I started here. Mark Zuckerberg. Many of you have seen this video, or maybe you haven't.
this research project that we have at Meta called Kodak Avatars. And the idea is that instead of our avatars being cartoony, and instead of actually transmitting a video, what it does is we've sort of scanned ourselves and a lot of different expressions, and we built a computer model of sort of each of our faces and bodies and the different expressions that we make, and collapse that into a codec that then, when you have the headset on your head, it sees your face, it sees your expression, and it can basically send an encoded version of what you're supposed to look like over the wire. So in addition to being photorealistic, it's also actually much more bandwidth efficient than transmitting a full video, or especially a 3D immersive video of a whole scene like this.
So how many of you have seen that video before? Was that, no, okay, so that's really interesting. So that, first of all, I'm blown away of how good that is, the reconstruction and so on and so forth. But that's me speaking as Mr. Geek and from a technologist perspective and what it took to do that. Now, if I'm thinking of as an economist, he talks about having lower bandwidth, but just a minute, the data and the computation at each end is huge, and beyond the capabilities of most small computers. That's okay, because Moore's law supposedly might fix that. But the question is, first, that's not what they're seeing. They're supposed to see each other. They're in a black background, so it's easy to do the chroma keying. We have no idea what they're seeing of each other. That was taken from a third party, a third perspective, and edited. I have no sense of, I'm assuming, and I'll grant them, that they're looking at each other. But understand, they're both wearing headsets. So those images, as high fidelity and as realistic and appropriate to that looking like that person, they're still deep fakes. And so the whole thing about that system, which is very clever, is you have to be reliant of how accurate the digital twinning is of being able to map on my face what I'm actually doing and what I'm actually looking at. And those are inferences. They're not, and you have to judge the reliability of that and have that trust. And because this is the problem, you never know what the other person's saying and how these things are being manipulated. Now, absolutely, my biggest rule is everything's best for something or worst for something else. I'm really impressed at what that work is doing, but I really, really want people to be, when they're explaining things, to be as literate and as open with what it's not good for and what the risks are as what it is, as what they are good for. Because everything has a downside as well as an upside. And the question is, when it's something new, you can't expect people to be able to know that. But if you're the one who built it, you have to have that awareness and be able to share that so people can make informed decisions. And so what I would say here is that those are really amazing avatars. And it saves you, and what typically you've had to do in VR meetings is construct your own avatar, which is a really, I find it creepy to do that, because first of all, Mark's old avatar, excuse me, Mark, but it looked like a monkey. And how do you take you seriously in that? And some of the early meeting rooms they had, but the thing is that I don't like, because if I wanted to meet with people and they make avatars that are all different, I have no idea who they are, and you have to do it for every environment. For everybody's VR system, you have to build your own avatar, and they're different. And I just want to go into a room and get on with the work, unless I'm playing games. And there's exceptions to everything. But these are just concerns. But I want to compare what we saw with Nick and Michelle with those images. Now, I can do a couple things. Let's remove the background. Now let's fill it in black. Now, granted, it's still, but I'm not sure how much value is added by getting a 3D there. And it depends on the movement. If you had them positioned in the right geometry, as we've been talking about before. But those are just video, because by the way, by getting rid of the background, if we want to do that, we've already done a bunch of bandwidth reduction. But that's not a deep fake. And you can do it on your phone. You can do it on your watch. Oh, yeah, soon. And so I want to then jump to the next state and say, well, have we done much work in this stuff? And yeah, Alona was really small here. It's hard to see from there, and what happens at this with display size and so on and so forth. So we fleshed out at the Cambridge lab in the UK a meeting room, which basically is configured like this one, but we used screens of this size, 55-inch displays, typically tilted in portrait aspect ratio on the side, and on the presentation screen was like an 84-inch one size thing, and then held a meeting. Now the entire meeting, it was this is from 2002, and Corey sorry, Corey, was chairing this session. And so you can watch it, and it's really, really interesting to watch this for what it does work, what doesn't, but compare it to the experience we're having right now. But you'll see how the genesis of some of these things work. So, and the link is here, but it'll be in the bibliography. So right off the bat, we're going to start with a scenario where somebody's presenting at the front of the room. They're basically doing what I'm doing. And instead of having two displays, and actually these are all 55-inch instead of the 84, we have a conference room with an 84. So live person, a remote presenter would be there, and the slides, if there are any, are there. So he's at the front of the room speaking. And you'll see the dynamics. And this is a video recording taken with sort of a multi-camera view that comes on here. So
To be done, and I think, if we get it right by, 2030, 2040, if we ask people metaverse, work or play, they will say, what are you talking about? It's the next internet. It's this and so much more. So let's get to work.
Great, thanks. Okay, let's have Mar, you want to present next?
Sure, I'm Mar Gonzalez Franco, a researcher.
So something that happened there, there's 2 or 3 things there that are really important. So you see, but when if we just go back a bit, you'd see that the speaker went back to his seat and sat down. And Mar has moved up from the audience back up to the front to now she's presenting, and so we'll see that.
It needs to be done, and I think, if we get it right by, 2030, 2040, if we ask people metaverse, work or play, they will say, what are you talking about? It's the next internet. It's this and so much more. So let's get to work.
So there's Mar at the back,
Great, thanks.
and now
Okay,
she's going to move herself.
Let's have Mar, you want to present
So
next?
she's gone, and now there she
Sure.
is.
I'm Mar Gonzalez Franco, a researcher here at Microsoft.
And so
And for me, I think one of the ways.
So she had agency to move from place to place, and she's actually life size in any place she is, because it's a small meeting in that group of 8, and so she went from there to the next spot. And
Okay, and Andy, if you want to.
notice, there's Andy. Andy is an avatar. The others are video, but in this meeting, somebody who's in 3D, and it's Andy Wilson. He's behind her and in the back. He's been watching through that display and seen the meeting from that position,
Okay,
and there he is.
Andy, if you want to jump up on screen 2, take it away. Love your avatar.
Hey, great. I'm Andy Wilson. I'm at Microsoft Research, and I do research in AR and VR. And, on this question of whether the metaverse is work or play, I think, it's already play. I think we've already seen various metaverses in gaming. But the question, I guess, is whether or not they're going to work together. And I feel like that's more of a business question rather than a technology question.
So
Okay, and
stop, and let's go.
Andy, if you want to jump.
So the key thing there is, I think many of you may have been in these Meta's meeting rooms or others where you're in everybody's avatars, but there's a virtual TV screen or display. So people coming in from Zoom or Teams, you're able to see in and look around as well. So the point here is that you should be able to participate, have agency, have presence, accessibility in all dimensions, and still come to the meeting. And wherever possible by existing technologies and available technologies is to be able to get full advantage of what those technologies can do. Now, there's a colleague, Jonathan Goldstein, who's worked with, and he's really smart. He comes out of database, not HCI, but he made a comment. He was working with us on some of this stuff. And he said, never has the gap between what the hardware is capable of delivering and what the software actually delivers been so great in the history of computing. Because the underlying operating systems, the applications, and the skills and the tools and software to enable these things to happen in real time and seamlessly is just, nothing was architected to do that. And the question, and this is how, in terms of project planning, is to figure out how do we avoid a huge speed bump so that we can maintain continuity and take these concepts and build the patterns, but start to actually engineer things in a way and gradually evolve to where we need to go, but survive, but avoid as many of the speed bumps which would happen if we did a big bang change. And maybe that's what has to happen, but we want to try to make this avoidable. And that is why we need to understand this from the UX community and be able to articulate these points from a business perspective, as well as understand the engineering challenges, and as well as the user experience challenges, so how the people can move. Because if there's a market and people can use it, there's going to build desire if it's affordable, and affordable in all currencies, money, technology, bandwidth, and time. So I want to walk through some of these things. This is this book, Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash. If this is sort of like the book that everybody who talks about VR is going crazy about and read it and its inspiration, and it's an okay book, but there's a few things in it that are really interesting. I'll try and zoom this up. I still think you'll have difficulty reading it, so I'm going to highlight what's important here. Damn it. Why does that never work? There's two protagonists. One's Hero, and the other's YT. YT calls Hero Pod. So if you want, Pod and Hero are the same person. But the main thing is, Hero says to her, because she just called him, where are you? In reality or the metaverse? Now think about that for a minute. And she says both. That's pretty cool. From the book that sort of inspired a lot of this thinking and the conceptualization. If the people who are talking about it and waving this book around and talking about Snow Crash, the book itself says Hero doesn't know. And furthermore, she can be in two realities at the same time. And that says, again, as long as we have a common ground, a common understanding, and a common framework, where the mediation that we're using personally enables us to have full participation and access and presence, then that's all we need. Because what's very different for me, compared to you, for example, it's natural for me. It is authentic. Each person has to have an experience that's authentic with the resources and the place and context in which they're functioning, which may be completely different than other people. But those differences, if they're properly mediated, can be transparent and invisible because we're in a common space, that where conventions that are common and familiar are allowed to exist. So the whole thing that comes out in the topic then just sort of says, so that means that systems have to adapt. Now, adaptation is two books that are free. This is Piaget's introduction to the Psychology of Intelligence by Jean Piaget. His definition of intelligence, and it's an ecological definition, is the ability of an organism to adapt to a change in environment through the dual process of accommodation or assimilation. And that basically means either the environment has to adapt to me or I have to adapt to the environment. But of course, it's always some combination of the two. The other is Darwin. And where he says adaptation is what he means when those who best can adapt are the ones that survive. And that's going to happen with technologies as well. That the things that can adapt to the context that they're in the social, within the ecological framework, are the ones that are going to survive. And what I've been talking about is adaptation. So, and I've tried to use a small example, but I could have given you a completely different set of examples. But that, let's just say these things have to be able to work together, regardless of superficial differences. And by design, as UX designers, we have to try to take that into account, as many of the point case sums, and then say, how can we make the underlying system work regardless of this set that we can anticipate of technologies that might want to be able to be gateways into the service that we're trying to provide. So adaptation by Piaget basically is closely tied to intelligence. But what we know from basically architectural space and all these things about spatial relationships, that's also, those are one of the drivers that, and that comes back to intelligence, because there's meaning in space. That's what thoughts exchanged by one another mean different things in one place than in another. Basically says the semantics are drawn partially from the location, social and other locations. And there's the meaning. So yeah, AI is part of this. And it's really critical, but so is the ubiquitous computing, but it's not about ubiquitous computing. And that's where we're going to go next. This is that we talk about persona in our design. We've taken courses and read books and stuff like that when you're doing the design process. And what I'd argue is that I have to invent a word. Playsona are just as important, if not more important, than persona. So start thinking about placeonas and bring that into the vocabulary. Good words that capture a concept that is neglected. It's not a new concept, it's just neglected. Help, just the way persona did when it was introduced. And by the way, the concept was introduced way before the word was introduced. The second thing is that we've got things like wearable computing, and that includes headsets and VR. But this is change the spelling to wearable with the H. Where are these devices? This came because my wife, she was driving to the airport to go give a talk, and she said, "What's the talk about?" Location, location, location. She said, "Oh, it's about wearable computing." I said, "No, it's about location, location, location." Then no, so it's about wearable computing. Finally, this went back and forth, almost at the airport. And finally, I said, "For pity's sakes, Liz, what is it you don't understand about the difference between location, 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 and wearable computing?" Says, "Bill, what is it you can't understand about how to spell wearable?" And so it's that, but that's a good term. And so to wrap this up, everything I said about this notion of being able to adapt and have different mediation, if we can engineer systems that way, I want to point something out. I've given a small repertoire of the types of modalities of coming in, but be very clear. The very same processes that let us adapt to the mediating technologies available, those technologies have to be adapted to the person using them. And so what I've been speaking about the whole time is about accessibility. I've been talking about accessibility for people who basically maybe don't have any major impediments about their audio, motor, sensory, or systems. But let's be clear, the underlying plugins there are there that would enable people who have sensory or other challenges to actually have that as a first-class citizen, because it's not an add-on any more than adapting to these different technologies. If we could do this, we make the affordances, the cost of building systems that are adaptive to all needs much, much better. And importantly to me is the cost. The first world has no problem. We've got internet, we've got all kinds of Wi-Fi, we can get all this sort of stuff. No, the developing world, if you really want to go, that's where the growth is, and that's where the market is. That's how you learn to sell that this is where the growth is. You may not be an economist, but you want this done, and it doesn't matter what. Find reasons that will appeal to whoever is a gatekeeper that can enable or retard the development in this. And if we can get those things right, we're in great shape. Now, I'm just going to wrap up now, because the real thing here is, now that we can do anything, because basically we can do anything with technology, so we put our minds to it within certain reason. The question is, what should we do? And then the question is, how do we do it? How do we accomplish it? And stop thinking about, I want to do AI. Because quite frankly, large language models as they exist today are a very impoverished notion of what language even is. And nobody talks about that. Let's put it this way. Go back to 1979 to 82 to something called Put That There, a project done before the Media Lab existed at the Architecture Machine Group. You'll find it on YouTube. And two people, graduate students, built a system where you could point, speak, and it's stuff you just can't do today even. And every piece, like today, what I'm talking about here, everything was over the counter. And let's put it this way. The first linguistic utterance any of us made was a pointing gesture. Before, and it wasn't there was no verbal utterance because you were 9 months old when you started to point. Congenitally blind children point. And none of our systems can do that. And the only things to do, like I can do this, and now I've really screwed up my system because the camera's really going to start doing things, right? Now it's locked. But these are really important things to understand. That if you can't point and mark and speak and do these things together, then it's not a multimodal system. It's plural modalities, but they're not coordinated, and the semantics aren't drawn in. And if they can't draw in the semantics of the space, much less the gestures, much less the voice or head direction, then we don't have a full language model. We have an impoverished view, and it's not going to be an intelligent system. That doesn't mean it's not useful, but don't oversell. And we need to be able to articulate that. And I think these case studies actually help prove that. So basically, I'm going to finish. I'm just going to flash through this so you can see. Here it is, the bibliography. There's links on it, and you've got and the one final thing I forgot. I should have put this in, but I just tied this in the end if I had time. Ubiquity, about ubiquitous computing, is everything's everywhere all the time for everybody. That's what it means, everywhere. What I'm talking about is ubiquity. I have an Oxford English Dictionary. I was looking up ubiquity. I wanted to get the exact definition. I worked with Mark Weiser when he was coining the term. We all had to look it up because we didn't know what it meant, because we're a bunch of dumbos. And I'm talking about ourselves, not you. But ubiquity, I didn't know what that word was, but I stumbled on it because it's adjacent pretty much to ubiquity. And it has a condition with respect of place or location, local relationships, awareness. And I think that Mark Weiser, when he was talking about ubiquitous computing, and he died early, and I know he would agree with me, he used the wrong word. He should have used ubiquity and ubiquitous computing. Because to make things transparent, they have to be appropriate for place and function and follow the moral order of place and behavior. And that is wearable computing. that is the world of Plesona. And with that, I'm going to stop, and then I'm happy to take any questions.
Bravo, bravo. I invite anyone to ask questions by unmuting. You can maybe raise your hands. There's some clapping going on virtual, as that is. And if anybody has questions in the chat, I'm happy to read them out.
Yeah.
So lots of clapping going on.
And I hope given COVID since 2020, that if you've had a meeting that went this way, that you could do this and just worked before, that that's great. I'd love to know who was doing it and how they did it. But if this is actually sort of somewhat of a better experience about how to do a talk remotely, so you can task-based, person-based, reference-based positions are functioning, it feels like it's obvious and it's simple to do. And why has it taken? How do we manage through COVID without getting that? Well, maybe a lot of the burnout from teams working and remotely was due to the disconnects and the brokenness of the spatial, the types of things we're working on right now that I've been discussing.
There's a question
Yep.
from Sandra. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yeah, sure. First of all, Bill, thank you. Wonderful talk. Thank you. It brings to mind one of my favorite quotes from Ursula K. Le Guin, the author, that all knowledge is local. And I'm wondering what thoughts you have about the implications of knowledge transfer and I don't know, equalization, getting out of the echo chambers when we think about the specificity of place for interactions.
Yeah, so I'm an Army brat. My father was in the chaplain of the Canadian Army, and I moved around and lived in various countries. And the first thing is that, of course, what the moral order of place and functions of face and even gestures are very different in different contexts, but so are the economic conditions and so on. And I think that what I'm pleased with is that if there's not input, it would be really the height of hubris to assume what people and cultures and places and situations that we're from the privileged West, that we're not funded with to make decisions on behalf of others. And so this is why having not just social scientists, but social scientists native to the environment and the places that we're trying to adapt to, we have to take those things into account. There's a woman, Jackie, who's in Africa, setting up a lab, has a lab out there, and has given us feedback. And they're very small voices, they're very quiet, but there's absolutely a need for the social science on this, and not just from people who have traditionally done it. I'm not sure that addresses your question, so please, if I didn't give you a satisfactory answer, to come back at me.
That was great. Thank you.
Question from Ren through the chat. She'd like to know what you miss the most about the in-person physical experiences.
I miss it hugely because of the lack of, for example, after COVID, when I just go into the labs in Redmond at MSR, but it'd be the same thing of going at the university. But even MSR, it's different because there's different Yeah, I don't know. It could be the same probably in any place. Bumping into people from different disciplines that who I know from some other reason, but I just say, oh man, there's a question I have, and I'm gonna pick your brain for a while because they have expertise that I don't have. And or just that notion of that bumping in, having people aware that you're in the building and they can search you out and that you're available just in passing, on this type of peripheral awareness and social awareness is there. And also in context, because you'll have conversations in that building because we all know we're there for work in that purpose, as opposed to out on a bicycle ride or which is, we'll have a whole other kind of conversation, which sometimes is even more useful. But it really makes a difference. Saul Greenberg and I, if you know who he is, he's one of my closest colleagues and was heading up a lot of UX stuff at the University of Calgary. We wrote some of our most papers while we're hiking up on mountains, and driving my son who was with us crazy because they want you guys stop working or something like that. But no, we're just being silly and outrageous, and then all of a sudden that silliness sometimes makes sense, and it doesn't dominate it, but there's so it's and sometimes you're away from your family and other distractions when you're in these places too, and there's a cocoon. And I think that I've tried to do things in the space here, and that's why I emphasize the notion of having an open door. And I don't have to be in the office, but whether the lights on or not, they can tell if I've been into work. If they call up and I don't answer, they know I'm not in the immediate vicinity, and just making that available and other people can jump into that room too, and they can meet at the door, and I don't have to do it. And the main point is that if I've got the pedal that if I keep my microphone muted and the other person's muted, for me here in Toronto, in the mornings from 9 till noon in Toronto time, that's 2 to 5 in Cambridge, England. So I typically have that open link there. And so when Panda, who I work with a lot, we'd just be sitting there with our mics down and I could just working away. So it's the perfect office mate because we were in a shared office and banging away. And I could just sort of just push unmute and say, hey, are you done yet, Panda? And he'll say, no, that was the meeting. And it cost the same thing as just turning my head. And if you read Bob Kraut's work and stuff in Belcourt, those are the types of transactions. The people you most collaborate with and have the most interactions with are the people in your office, in the adjacent office, in the same corridor, on the same floor, in the same building, and the frequency and it goes. And the further away you are, the longer meetings are, the longer they take to schedule, and the longer they take, and the more people are in them, and the less work is done. And those are statistics that are well known since the 90s, and we have to try and take that into account. But that notion of figuring out that, and by the way, at noon hour, I switch over and I change desks, and Michelle is typically sitting beside me because assuming we work 9 to 5, which of course none of us do. But so there's overlap, but then that's how it goes. It's really the way to what I hope happens is I've been doing this stuff since 1988, 89, working in desktop video conferencing. And so I'm still learning. I've tried to share tips of things I've learned from there, which in some sense are easy and obvious, but not, it's obvious once you know them, right? And but you're going to have other experiences you bring with it which could bring up other ways of using, which I would hazard to guess that some of what I talked about today may well have stood you in better stead throughout the difficult years of COVID, but they still might be able to help. And it's not how many computers you have in your desk, it's how you use them and where they're situated and how you might play with them.
Question from Deb in the chat. With the current healthcare trend towards aging in place, how do you see leveraging patterns of in-person interactions applying to home life social hybrid interactions as distinct from work from home.
So you wouldn't have any reason to know this, but Sunday I turned 75. So I'm rapidly advancing into that category. So maybe I hope before when I'm at the point where I can't ski, I can't cycle or climb and stuff like that, that we'll have these problems sorted out. That's kind of why I haven't retired. I've rewired, and why I'm doing this, for example, to try and share what I think I've learned, or at least share for argument, for consideration. And by the way, my favorite thing is to be people tell me I'm wrong and then explain to me, because that's a sign of respect, but it also says if two very bright people have a different opinion, that means that there's might be something there of interesting, because we don't know what the answer is. And we, as researchers and designers, get paid to find out. What better life can you have? And so I throw things out and then wait for pushback, and then but also try to live the life. There's a lot of things of what we're doing tonight. It took me a long time to be able to just tune the cameras and get the lights so you can read the text and change the fonts and all that sort of stuff. And I still have the cameras, and be willing to take those risks, because if you actually are willing to do that, and we didn't rehearse this. I finished this deck about an hour ago. That gives you, it's way better if you do that than, let's say, for what Negroponte used to do as head of the media lab. He always used 35mm slides and to use no media to talk about how great media is going to be. And I'm sorry, that just seems weird. His book on being digital didn't have a single image in it. It's just, and he's a smart guy, such some really good stuff, but it's just, these are these funny quirks. Yeah.
So first of all, I need to sort of mark the point in time of 8:30, which is generally the time we end. But if you don't mind going a little bit longer, I'm very happy to continue. And our audience, you are all free to come and go, but we still have quite a number of people here and a number of questions. So I would like to, can I pass the questions on?
Yeah.
Matt, would you like to start us off with the next question? And then Gary will go next, and then we'll go to the chat. I seemingly your questions.
Yeah.
Hey, Bill. Really nice to see you. It's been a long time.
Yeah, absolutely.
For the rest of the people here, Bill was a reader on my thesis in 1998, my master's thesis. And we've known each other since then, had a lot of these similar kind of conversations. I loved what you said about almost all of it, but I love what you said about the peripheral awareness thing, having your screen next to you that is always on, as though it's your office and you can just drop by. And sorry, I'm getting a message here. I don't know what it is. You can hear me, right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, well, don't worry about the message then. It's Zoom telling me that my microphone's not properly set. Anyway, I love that. And at some point I'd love to drop by and we can chat. That would be really nice. So if we were in the same room, we were in the same building, I would swing by and check out your conference room. But I do have a question. It's kind of about, I'm having trouble formulating it, but the thing is, I feel like there's a temptation, and there always has been a temptation, to kind of think that reality is better and therefore try to simulate reality. So when you look at the stuff that Zuckerberg is doing, or when you look at the stuff that's going on with this idea from the video you showed at Microsoft where everybody's placed and situated around a table, sure, it has advantages. There's all kinds of good advantages to knowing where people are, to being able to use your peripheral senses and all of that kind of stuff. What I'm concerned about when I see that kind of stuff, even in Snow Crash, actually, is this drive to think reality is better, so we'll simulate it. People end up building all kinds of stuff that we don't necessarily need, and then sometimes throwing out the baby with the bathwater. So in your examples, I really like the fact that you've leveraged physical awareness without actually saying, hey, we have to rebuild everything, make it all 3D, all of that. But how do you approach, or what do you think the techniques should be for trying to separate out, like, what's the fundamentally good thing about something like emplacement or gaze or whatnot? And then instead of necessarily trying to rebuild that, how do we implement that in the next generation of technology, if that makes sense? So that people, for example, who are used to being able to work from their phone or their watch or the airplane or whatever can leverage the benefits of that while still having the benefits of being in separate places. It's not always better to be always all in the same place. So anyway, that's my I don't
first of all, I agree. And in fact, here's my confession. My carbon footprint is terrible. I've got 2.5 million miles on Air Canada alone of real miles flown. And that's partially how you have an international career, especially in starting back in the 70s, where you kind of have to be there. And the funny thing is, when I started work on remote collaborative work, is when my travel went through the roof, which is also ironic. So that's my confession. What I'd say is that when this Microsoft's head, what's it called?
HoloLens, yeah.
The HoloLens came out. I loaded Office on it and all my documents. And what I used that for, because if you don't know, it's this big thing, but the neat thing is it's still one of the only headsets that has a full-on Windows computer inside and enough storage to store useful stuff. And it's you can see through. And you can hook up a Bluetooth keyboard and a mouse to it. So I would, if I wanted to do private work and be undisturbed on an airplane, especially if I'm flying economy, I can put the keyboard on the table, even if the jerk in front of me's got the seat back way in front of me. I can use the mouse, and I have multiple windows, so I don't have to, I mean, it's really easy. I've got this huge spread of real estate, and I can still see the meal tray coming down the corridor, or if the person by the window, because I always try to get an aisle seat, has to go to the washroom or something, I have this awareness. And there's a case where absolutely that is the best technology. It's way better than a laptop or an iPad or anything like that in most cases, but you look like a bozo. And so I did it. I took one for the team, so to speak, for the learning, but I didn't want to just, yeah, I don't know. I just ego, whatever. It's this. I don't like looking like a jerk or some sort of geek. But you know, but on the other hand, people will say you can't help it, Bill. But anyhow, but the trick is to take and try those things out and then say, okay, well, what would it take to make this acceptable? And that people are aware you're doing that. And by the way, the reason I wear big, if I'm not doing that, I carry the Bose quiet covers that cover up, because it basically says, that's the only time I have time to read and be left alone. And when I put them on, it's a signal saying, don't even talk to me. I don't care who you are. I want to be alone, and I don't have to be rude, because they actually know that it's rude if they're bumping me unless it's important. And so there's these types of signs we use, and that's, again, proximity and so on and so forth, that we know from the physical world. And so it's not one or the other. The question is what's appropriate and what's the strengths and weaknesses. There's an essay, I'm happy, it may be alone, you can tell me to add it to the bibliography, by a guy named Melvin Kranzberg. And he was a historian of technology who I've known since back in the late 70s when I started working at Park, that when he retired, he gave he has 7 rules, but his first 7 laws. And the first law is technology is not good, it is not bad, but nor is it neutral. It will be some combination of the two. And as soon as you say that, you have to say, well, what's the metric for good and bad? And what are you, and by the way, there's lots of different metrics. It depends on what dimensions. And so what are the important dimensions? And then for each dimension, what's the metric? And how do you juggle that? But at least you're not going to get the right answer, but at least you've got a way to structure the thinking. And his second law, which I love because he clearly loves language in a way I love and try to improve upon, is he says, invention is the mother of necessity, which is fun because it's just the inverse of how we normally say that, at least in English. And basically that's like a corollary to the first, because it basically, or a lemma, because if is going to have there's going to be something that's bad. And you built it, you created the necessity to fix it, and you own it, right? And it's really important in certain things where you can't put the genie back in the bottle. And come up with things like Cambridge Analytica and so on and so forth. These are just things that we have to be very careful of, and yet we don't want to be paralyzed. And so we do our best, and we're not going to get it always right. But the question is, one of my ways of thinking and approaching things is I really detest the term fail early, fail often. I think that is a very negative, and it's just makes it too easy to excuse lack of thought and just letting 1,000 monkeys hit the typewriters. If you say, just all you have to do with a turn of language, say, learn early, learn often. And by the way, when you're doing any science, the fact that you put the hypothesis, whether the hypothesis is true or false, does not mean it's failed or successful. It says that I learned that, okay, now I can improve the model because I've confirmed that this part works. But if it's false, I mean, I still have more to learn, and this isn't the answer, so now I can go here. So I gradually can move forward. And so I would say that there's a number of people who, coached me and learned from, but basically they've very much emphasized the notion of rationale, design rationale, decisions rationale. So when I'm working and we're brainstorming stuff like that, we'll put the ideas there, but we accompany them with, on the whiteboard, with what the rationale for that decision is. And therefore, if you want to change the decision, you have to say, okay, let's go back to the record. Here's the rationale. Are those terms that we made the decisions the same, or something changed? And if something's changed, then we absolutely, it's legit to try and rethink, if possible, to rethink that decision, or to add a new rule. But these are the things about management. There's different ways, but when you've got something that's working, you've got a good rationale, and nothing's changed, then going. So anyway, I'm going on too much, and there's too many questions, so I'll try and make things briefer.
Gary, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thanks so much, Bill. I have a question on, so one of the things that's great about being in an office versus like remote is like the ability to like overhear conversations. And I've also thought it was interesting you mentioned the always on office where you could drop in. I really like that. I'm also wondering, I've thought before about a bit like a communal space, like a metaphoric like lunchroom or common room where people could just drop in. And also overlapping with that, like that's always on 24/7. And then maybe overlapping and kind of like extending that is like, in Slack, I don't know, Slack is like a Teams, but Slack is really easy to have huddle rooms in where you can have an audio huddle really easily. But what's missing with that is you can't overhear other people's Slack huddles as you would if you walked the floor, overhearing people in their different workspaces. And then you get into a serendipitous, like you serendipitously discover a conversation that's going on as you're walking around that space. So I was wondering if you've given thought to, rather than like a central location, that like an office and modeling that as you have already, having a decentralized office floor metaphor where you design the office, and if you want to wander and walk the floor and kind of like overhear things that aren't sensitive, like if there's, if you have your meetings like that are, you can either toggle like this is top secret private versus feel free to walk by and overhear like, what we're doing and ask to join or kind of kibitz, like hover over, if you've given any thought to that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I think the first thing that comes to mind is that once we have, if we have these spatial patterns and known spaces, and one can wrap them in basically who can come in or out. It's sort of like when I visit Samsung, I can't get online. I mean, you go on the building, there's no way I can get anything onto, and there's no guest network. There's nothing. At Microsoft, we'll have a guest, and many places you can get on the guest network. But if there's major things about, let's say, kinship. with technologies. So for example, when I'm in my car, I think in my last talk, maybe I gave it, this was at Autodesk, or maybe it was, but the Bluetooth, when your phone adapts to your car, the car doesn't, when I rent the exact same car I own, with the exact same phone and the exact same me, the phone makes no distinction, and the car doesn't. The behavior to what my phone should share with a rental car is completely different than my own car, even if everything else is exactly the same. So there's no notion of kinship. So on the networking protocols, the first thing we need to do is add another layer so that we say Bluetooth and that just says we've got a connection. We have a way that a conversation and negotiation can be mediated. Now let's negotiate. Who are you? What are your credentials? And what do you want to do? And then I'll let you in. And we can establish that, and if we can have secure identities. And so when I walk into my office, I would like to be able to turn my office on rather than have to log into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 computers, not to mention my phones, and do updates on all of them, right? Turn a switch, turn it on. It's my office. It's on my local area network. It's really secure. It's me, right? So that would be nice. But the main thing is that if I'm going in with my Microsoft credentials, assuming I still have my card and was working there, I shouldn't have to log on to the to get onto CorpNet onto a public in a meeting room. But if you're not got credentials, you should have to do that. So the levels, but it doesn't know that whether you're here. But if the person who's coming in has the credentials within a secure building, in most cases you should be able to have. These things should be layered, and I think that now we come back to that and say, well, whether that's in a physical room or a virtual room, maybe you have the same type of thing when I'm coming in. Now the next thing is that's really interesting is whether we're so ocular centered. A lot, as you said, audio is really important. So I spent the last 5 years at Microsoft working on some project called Soundscape. And if you want to look that up, it's just a Microsoft Soundscape. It's on GitHub now. If you have an iPhone and you get the Sony earbuds or the Bose Link, try that. They have IMUs in them. They can track your head and stuff like that. And we're using non-speech spatial audio to give cues so that blind people can walk out in the wild and not just follow a prescribed route, but actually navigate on their own using their to augment their mobility skills with a dog or a cane. Now the thing about that is that and this is just acoustic AR, but if you can, all of our devices can have distance cues and directional cues, and so you can actually hear people. And if you can't get stereo audio, I mean binaural with using the IMU and RTS from the head functions, then you can actually focus your attention, and now the cocktail party comes into effect, and you can in fact focus if you're having things come out of one speaker. And that's the most important thing. If I'm here, got my back to Alona there or Abby there, if they say, hey, just a minute, Bill, you're wrong, I'm just going to turn my head, bango, bingo, right? And and that's so simple to do. And the thing, because we were working with people who were not sighted, we had to have headsets that have an IMU that do not impede with the ear. So we started off with these so-called bone conduction headphones. The RockShox is sorry, that's the fork of a mountain bike. But something rather shocks. But Sony has these. The Sony Link have a donut hole. They're earbuds that actually do not impede because you need your hearing the natural word. But if you're in a conference room and there's remote people and they don't have video, the people that if you got a group from Germany, from Austria, and Northern Italy, from Südtirol, and people from Germany, and you know that there's those labs at those 3 places, they're all speaking with male voices with German accents. If I just place them at different spots in the acoustic space in the room when they're just on a teleconference, I know who's talking. if I have everything into one speaker. The latest book, somewhere here, right here, this is the hardcover, but we just published a book on audio for interface design, not speech audio. But the key point is that look at the soundscape, look at this stuff, the HR, and there's a lot of work to be done there to create spatial things that are just completely acoustic. And when you're walking down the street and say, what's around me, or show me where, when I'm near a pharmacy or something like that, it'll just say directional pharmacy is right here, and it will come from that direction, no matter what your head is there, and it will give a distance cue so you know how far it is. And those types of things are really useful, and you don't look like a glass hole if you're just having audio. And there's just a lot of work to do still, but I deviated, and I'll try to control myself. But hopefully that was partially answered your question. Or
Thanks for that so much.
Thanks.
Is there now, Ming Lee? Did you want to ask your question? Please go ahead. Unmute. Can you unmute? Okay.
I'm waiting.
We can see you waving and cannot hear you. Your microphone's not working. Okay, let me see if I can read this comment here. Question is, with AI agent, AI agent comes into your physical reality, how do we spot new spatial patterns? Is that correct?
Yeah, so this is the professorial answer to such a question that's universally correct. It depends. And then I have to say, what does it depend on, and how do we find out what it depends on? And I think it depends on the nature of the message and the social relationship, the kinship of me with the person who or the agent in terms of my workaday life. And I think that's kind of a key way to start trying to answer that question. I think that one reason I think French, Piaget is he's actually Swiss, but the English translation, my French, I just couldn't get through it. But so my Piaget sort of stuck full of Post-it notes. But it's easy to remember that Piaget says that definition of an ecological definition, and we are in an ecosystem, an ecology, and is the ecological definition of intelligence is the ability of an organism to adapt to a change in environment. And that means changing as we move, or as even the conversation moves from topic to topic. Those are all changes in the conceptual environment as well. And the first thing we have to do is understand the transitions, and how do we get from one topic to another, one place to another. How does the meaning change, and how should the interactions change, and how can things flow? But the main point about that, all that aside, he says there's these two processes. One is adaptation, and the other is accommodation, and the other is assimilation. And dive deep into those two things. But basically, it's how does the outside world drive your behavior, and how do you integrate how do you just use the existing skills working in the environment, the change. The patterns I talked about today were there to say, I can make it as easy as possible for people to transfer skills to the new environment, and therefore avoid the power function of learning. Because we understand skill transfer is a function of recognition, and the minute you recognize a pattern, you're after the races. if you have to impose a whole new way to do things, and especially if you do it a different way in different environments with different systems, you have no recourse to use existing skills at the top level. And therefore you have to learn, and you have to learn when to use this technique versus that technique and this technique, depending which application. It's like changing the hotkey mappings on every application you have, which by the way, are still not consistent in a couple places in Outlook even. Try Control F on that, and it does not go to search, for example. So I'm just saying that these are things that we, these give us the options and the two strategies. Now, in terms of privacy, there's a woman who, the first person I hired, I think, on the Ontario Telepresence project in around 1990 was a sociologist named Gail Moore. And we were trying to deal with these things like privacy and so on and so forth. And she just said to me, like, not exaggerated, I love it. She's just so cool. But she said, but Bill, and you're going right away to try and build a technological solution to drive that, to control behavior and bad behavior. And it's absolutely clear that what you're going to more likely do is build a firewall where the fire exits should be, and take away the fire exit firewalls where they belong, and make that go through it. So that you need to have lived. This is the old saying: the only way to engineer the future tomorrow is to have lived in it yesterday. That way will give you the experience. You'll find out where the fire exits should be, where the entrances should be, what the protocols should be, and mostly, for example, how do you approach? And so at the tail end of the deck is a whole other set of examples that I didn't use today, but I'm leaving in that you can go through on your own, that talks about my office and how back in 1992, 3, and 4, and how that was set up in terms of locations within the office, just in terms of coming into my office and being able to come down the corridor, and even using audio so I can hear your footsteps, delay the connection to your call, right? So if I'm coming in, if I'm going to come in to call me, I would like to not get an instant connection to the video and the Teams. What I would like is what we built, and it actually worked, is you'd have these ear cons, basically acoustic icons, of just footsteps coming down the corridor, closer and closer. And so I'd have an alert so that I could finish my greasy sandwich, or wipe my face, or blow my nose, or whatever, or finish up with something else. So I'm here, you're coming, even if you're just coming down the corridor to poke your head through the door. And when Hiroshi Ishii was there visiting the lab, he said he never would call me because he said it's really rude to come right up onto your desk. So I put a camera and a monitor up above the doorway where he would enter. And so the first connection is he comes there, and people could just glance in there, and with low value. And so we could make these things in such a way that he could come in and then say, "Hey, Bill, you got a minute?" And I'd say yes, and then he could then move in closer within the office. I mean, it sounds corny, but that's a fairly interesting. It worked really well, and I even one of my graduate students, she instrumented my door so that it could sense on my, if you looked me up, am I available? You could tell if my door was open, ajar, or closed, or locked, kind of thing, so that you'd know what my accessibility was. And it came by virtue of the door. And so I used the same mechanism for the physical world as I did for the virtual world. And that's mixed reality. And all she did is screw a Macintosh mouse onto the wall, put a rubber band around the hinge to drive the mouse, one of the shafts of the mouse, and brought it in, and through we hacked the drivers so that we could actually have the door animated, because I never had to change state. The door maintained state, period. And it's just these types of things. But this doesn't answer the question of live and in person or not. But it also, it's we can have it one or the other. But one of the reasons I wanted to start this meeting the way we did is having Alona be remote, but show that it was really seamless for her to move to this position, whether she's physically here or not, and it doesn't matter. And and it's thinking about the transition. So the final thing is this is my worst riddle, but I never tire of telling it. Because this is all about adaptation. What do Canada and transitions have in common? It's a very geeky joke. I'm sorry if you're a social scientist, you might not get it. They're dominated by the states. And so when I'm thinking about these different cases, those are the states, and we always fill these in, and we do, we do storyboards, and we have all the details in the states, and then we just have arrows pointing to the next state. And there's no details there. If there's not as much detail and thought in the description of the arrows, the transitions from state to state, you're going to get it wrong 9 times out of 10. And the other thing I'd say is there's a book, and if I'll try and remember to put it in there if this doesn't make sense, what most people call storyboarding in HCI, having worked in Hollywood and worked on film planning and that, there's a really good book called Shot to Shot. Nobody would recognize what we call storyboarding. You can take courses in just the semantics of arrows, how you draw them. And what you'll find is that in a storyboard, there are arrows of different types within the frame, intraframe and interframe. So and moving back and forth, and with text annotations. And if those things aren't there in how we're even storyboarding and planning things out on the whiteboard, we're probably missing the point, because there's going to be a big speed bump going from place to place, and that disrupts the flow. And that's why the examples of just being able to come in and overlap and so on and so forth that's embodied in examples I tried to present tonight in the limited case that I covered. But that's probably enough.
By coming in.
Yeah, so
I'm
coming in.
trying
So
to do that same
have to finish it.
transition.
So this is, we can do this again, and we can go down through different examples. And if you ever want to have a talk on the collection and
We will definitely have an updated
on,
talk. By the way, we have a YouTube channel that has TorCHI event presentations that we've collected, including the very detailed presentation where you gave the first talk on your collection, which, by the way, Bill has a collection that he's donated to the Smithsonian of interactive devices. And his space here, I can attest, is full of such things, and it's really an amazing place. So the extension of that talk we can definitely do again. But Bill is also an expert of talking, much longer than we ever expected. And I think his wife is waiting to cook dinner, and I think we need to get out of the house. So I'm going to wrap this up.
Okay.
We're going to get the details of the presentation, the slides, and the bibliography on the event page that you can find in TorCHI. We will have this video recording of this presentation on our YouTube channel. And we hope that you enjoyed this visit to TorCHI, and hope you will come and join us again, because we're going to be looking forward to more interesting ideas from you. So please propose them. Contact me. I'm very happy to see all these smiling faces and many cameras on. So good job, everybody. Thank you very much for your great questions. And Bill, thank you so much. That was awesome.
My pleasure.
As always. Yes.
Thank
you. So we'll see everybody
Bill.
next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
great.
Alana.
Awesome.
Bye.
Sorry. We finished 3 minutes after. That's good. All right. And we need to mute, and we need to end.
Hot mic, hot mic.
No, that's okay.
And
I still want to know how to make Zoom work with
w-
touch.
Yeah.
And
No, this is great. This
bye,
We're all
everybody.
gonna be swinging by your desk now and saying, "Hey, Bill, you got a minute?"
yeah.
No, I'm going to end it now. So everybody, bye. Great to see you.
Bye.
But if
Bye.
you want, I will send you the link.
Bye-bye.
Good.